Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the Let Me Ask You This podcast. I'm your host, E.B. Hepworth, short for Elizabeth, and I want you to know I'm so grateful you're here. We start every episode off by saying this, but thank you, thank you, thank you. You could be anywhere in the world, and you're choosing to listen to this conversation, and it means the world. And I'm so excited for this week's guest with my fellow Elizabeth, which is why I said E.B. is short for Elizabeth, because today it's with one of my dearest friends, Liz Mannchen. And Liz, oh man, she has walked with me through some ugly seasons, and I have got the joy and gift of getting to walk with her through some ugly and hard seasons. And she's just been that friend that it's like you could call at 2 a.m. and she'll answer, and you can cry, you could scream, you could do whatever, and she's going to sit there and just weep with you. And it's truly a rare friendship. And she just brought home her second beautiful daughter from India through the miracle of adoption. And so in this episode, we unpack all things adoption. Actually, I shouldn't say all things, because that would take 16 years to unpack, but her journey with adoption and just what she's learned. And this episode, I know if you are a mother that's waiting, or you're a mother that feels called to adoption, or a father, I know that this episode is going to minister to you and bless you. And so without further ado, here is my conversation with my dear and powerful friend, Liz Mannchen. So here we are.
Last time.
All right. Tell the world who you are, Elizabeth.
A very tired mother.
That's a word.
That's the title of the season. Tired. My name
Tired
is Liz
but
Mannchen.
full.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Tired but not scared. That's a good one. Yes, my name is Liz, and my husband Uli and I. Uli is German. I'm
as German as they come.
Born and raised. As German as they come. He would roll his eyes as that. But yeah, Uli and I have been married for going on 15 years this year, and we live in a small little town called Palmetto right outside Atlanta, Georgia, which is a story in itself, how we ended up here, because neither of us are from here. And we have two beautiful daughters, Bobe and Emmeline. Bobe is 9 next week, and she was adopted in 2019 from China, and Emmeline is 2, and we recently just brought her home from India. And
wild.
That's, our wild little pack of international dreamers.
But we became friends through just the broken road of adoption. And both of us have been involved in missions for a long time. We were exposed to world poverty, social injustice, just a lot of brokenness. Both of us have gone through the battles of adoption, but also the battles of infertility, not in response to adoption, but both of our stories is similar in that. And so I say all that to say, for all listeners, I want everyone to understand how much Liz has held me in the last 8 years, in not just motherhood, not just marriage, not just financial hardships. Like in every shadow of my life, she's been there and always held me. So I want you to share a little bit about your story, maybe 5-8 minutes, about a little bit about your motherhood journey. This conversation is being framed around the loneliness that often fills a heart in the adoption journey for a lot of reasons. And so, if you could just give the world a little bit of context of your story and your journey, so then they can understand why we've both been so lonely.
So lonely. I will preface it with just kind of responding to what you said. And I think that you are somebody who allows people to hold you, and the right people to hold you. And I think that's also a big context of our relationship and this journey is knowing when and how and to let people hold you. So we have definitely I like to preface our story before I tell people. We have a unique adoption story, and not all adoptions are like this, I hope. So it's been a decade of a journey for our family, one that I, many times did not know how it was going to end, and yet was so convinced throughout the entire journey of how it was going to end. So it's crazy to me that we're kind of at this part where we are now, where Emmeline is home. But our adoption story started as early as when I was 12. It was one of the first ways that the Lord really spoke to me. It was one of the first times I ever heard his voice, which was, "You're going to adopt a little girl from China." So it became a very pivotal part of my relationship with the Lord, my relationship with the gospel. Cut to about 10 years later, the Lord very unexpectedly called me onto the mission field, and I was working in many developing countries with groups of artists and believers on projects that focus primarily on at-risk children and a lot with orphan care. And so he exposed me at a young age to the behind the scenes dynamics of the orphan crisis internationally. And that just broke me so many ways and prepared me for, I think, my path, my calling, my career, my children. And then in that, my work, I met Uli, and, we had talked about adoption before we even got married and knew that
Will
was our
you tell that
plan.
story? Actually, will you tell the story of the basement? Because I feel like that will help people understand who you are so well. You are
about how I can weave into between the most direct to the most awkward person imaginable in
all right. Tell
a
us.
matter of seconds, and it's amazing what goes on in this brain. But I knew that my husband Uli, now husband, but my boyfriend at the time, Uli, and I were kind of getting to that point of it's getting serious. He's probably going to propose, And so in my brain, I was like, well, before we can get married, I have to talk with him about adoption, because at that point, it wasn't just like something I wanted to do. It was like a sacred oath between me and the Lord. Like, I will adopt, right? So I was kind of working up the nerves to talk with him. And during lunch one day at our work, we worked at this old German castle. And it wasn't a castle, it was just like this beat up building. But I was like, hey, let's have a conversation. And he's like, oh, okay. And I was like, right now. And he's like, I'm eating. And I was like, no, we need to talk right now. And he's like, okay, is everything okay? So I brought him down to the mold infested basement of our work, right next to all the potatoes. I don't know, there's always potatoes in German basements. And I was like, I got right in his face and I was like, Uli, how do you feel about adoption? Big eyes like this, right? And he's like, I feel good. I feel good. Why? In general about adoption? I was like, yes. How do you feel about adoption? And he's like, well, this is what we do for a living, so I feel good. And I was like, no. How do you feel about adoption between you and I? And he's like, are we adopting? And I was like, we will adopt. He's like, we're adopting? And I was like, well, when we get married. We're getting married? And I was like, this is not going well. So he was like,
I am showing all my cards.
Oh yeah. But this also will tell you everything about my relationship with Uli, because our entire relationship, there's a constant, phrase that he says, Liz, slow down. Tell me what you want to say. So I slowed down and I was like, hey, I plan to adopt. And I told him my story about how the Lord talked to me about my little daughter in China. And before we move forward on the idea of getting married, I would love to know how you feel about this. And he was like, oh, got it. Much better. And so he took some time, took 2 weeks, which felt like a lifetime. And then he came back to me. He's like, I've prayed. Yes, that is definitely the plan for me as well. I would love to do that. Yeah, that's not really the way you should tell someone that you'd like to get married or that you want to adopt to,
We're going to do an entire second episode on the way to talk about adoption with your significant other and what not to do.
Yeah, what not to do.
But the funny thing is that my conversation with Zach went very similar. We weren't in a moldy castle basement, but it was basically like, this is a make or break. This is, I love how you said a sacred oath, because that's how it feels. You're like, this is a covenant, a promise. And so are you in or are you out? Because if not, I'm leaving, and it's just so harsh, but it's crucial. Okay. So, did you share was that in the conversation about the rabbits? Or was that?
No, the rabbit vision for the rabbits came a little bit later, but not too long after. We got married, and then we wanted to start our process for adoption pretty soon, but we weren't old enough. And so in international adoption specifically, you have to be of a certain age for different programs. And we were really only eligible for international adoption because I was, an expat living in Germany, and it was just complicated. And in this time, yes, the Lord had given me this vision for three little bunnies that had been like circling around Uli and I. I was just walking down the street one day and I just saw these bunnies jumping around us. And then at work that day, my friend came up to me. She's a wonderful artist. And she said, "Hey, I had this picture last night and I drew it out for you." And it was this image of me and Uli surrounded by three little bunnies. And I was like, well, that's from the Lord.
Yeah.
And so that was another kind of a clue for us on how somehow we had no idea what that would look like, but the Lord was going to speak through three little bunnies.
Yeah.
So we weren't eligible for a lot of programs yet because of our age. And so we said, well, we'll just try biologically. That didn't go so well. We experienced, like, 1 in 3 families do now, infertility, and it was brutal and it was so painful. But I'll hold that pain for later in my story of why that was such a crucial pain. But we were like, you know what, we're done with this season. We're ready for adoption. And the only program at that time that was eligible for us was the Madagascar program. And so we got into it. We were so passionate about it. We were ready to move to Madagascar. We were ready to go through all that. And then experience our first failed adoption. The country paused. They said no adoptions right now. And we went through our first experience of, we have a vision for a child and it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then soon after, we ended up turning 30 and we got into the China program. We got a match with Bobe. She was exactly like I had always envisioned she would be. And the day we met her, she jumped into the room wearing
Tell
a
the
little
story
bunny
of what they, I
outfit.
was just going to say this, the
Yeah,
song.
yes, that's true. She came when we met her. She jumped into the room wearing a little bunny jacket, but also on the way to the to meeting us, they showed us this video of her, and they were like, "Oh, she's singing a little song." And I said, "What's it called?" And they said, "Jiao Tutsi Kwe Kwe." And I said, "What's that about?" And they said, "Oh, it's about the mother with their three little rabbits." So I was like, well, okay, there's my first rabbit, just crying my eyes out. She comes in, jumps in like a little bunny wearing a bunny hat. And we're like, okay, great, got
Oh,
our first rabbit.
wow.
And you're just like, that's it, right? That's the glory. And then you go home, and we went home to Germany and came to a very unexpected
Trauma.
trauma. The best way to say it is that so Germany, we had done our adoption through an American agency, legal Hague finalized adoption, and Germany did not recognize it. They said it was not a legal adoption. They wanted to make Bobe a foster child. They wanted to take her away from us. And in that time, they also said, you will never be allowed to do more adoptions. And so it was a pretty quick decision, a painful, brutal
I will
decision. But
never forget that season.
yeah, we
Ever.
packed up our entire lives, our home. We said goodbye to Uli's family. We packed up our ministry, our work, and
Everything. You literally got rid of everything. The only thing you had were your suitcases and each other.
Yeah. And we came over here and we were like, it was this weird time of like, head down, I'm on a mission. We're going to expand our family. We're going to do more adoptions. And I think there was this perspective of like,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, you're expanding your family while losing some of your family, because it's important to note this moment in this season specifically, you lost your father, which was a huge piece, the starting genesis piece of your tie to China. And so it was like, in the name of growth, there's death, and and you got home, you barely had missed him and Bobe being able to meet, and it was like just this tragedy unfolding, but it was the middle of COVID. No one it was lonely, so life deep lonely, and so you fly to Georgia, and not only that, but then you move into a little tiny basement with this little tiny baby that you just became the mother of, and you're like, we have nothing to our name except each other and the Lord. And it was like an ache, like watching you in that road.
Mm.
I was like, I want to help her. I don't know how to help her.
Mm.
This is so hard to watch.
This is why you have good friends who like,
Yeah.
no, this is why you have good friends who can tell this story, sometimes even better than you, because when you're in it, you're just like, it's like the Germans say, sometimes you have to leave the forest to see the trees. And I think that was so the season of like the chaos going on around us. We're just now, years later, being able to really look at it and go, holy cow. Like, you know, someone's trying to take away your child. You're having to quickly deport from a country. You don't know if your family's going to stay together. It really wasn't a German, American citizen. He's German. Bobe's just adopted. I mean, if you've ever gone through an adoption, the first year is so critical. On our way
Dude.
here, my father passes. It was
I'm just now realizing it's really giving Joseph and Mary when Jesus was born, and they're like, you got to go to Egypt. Like
yeah.
it was like you had a target on your back.
Yeah.
And what I remember the most about that season is you were like beautifully broken, but you guys were so connected. I think like I remember just being like, dude, they are thick as thieves. Like they are going to, if they can go through this together, social workers knocking on the door, gosh, like, and it's like, you didn't have the luxury of paying for this expensive attorney and it fighting for you. Like all you had was the Lord fighting for you in that season. And it was like so intense. Okay. So I'm sorry.
I
I keep
often tell
interrupting.
Uli when he's like yelling at me about taking out the trash, I'm like, listen, we have had many bigger battles in our lives than this.
It's totally.
Although it does feel like
really
that is the biggest battle.
It puts in perspective war. Like you're like, I bear the scars of serious battles, and these little tiny minute things are no longer going to trip me up. Like
you would think that like we're still so petty. I mean, literally the biggest thing we find. He's like, gonna listen to
enough time has passed. He's like, I have amnesia of how connected we are. I
will say that I feel like our family's been through so many traumatic things that like you would think that we were really like not petty people, but we just still fight about the most ridiculous things because
retweet. I am like, you'd think I would grow up, but I am still over here like acting like a 5-year-old over. Yeah, I'm totally right there with you. Here's the thing is that when trauma is your baseline and cortisol is just your normal, when the dust settles, it's hard to find your footing in a restful, peaceful season. Like the chaos becomes an addiction because you're just so used to that fight or flight, and you're just like, 100%. Okay. And you try, like, you're waiting for the shoe to drop and you're waiting for someone to like come after you and you're waiting. Okay. And so you're just fully flexed, ready to go. And it's hard to settle into like a new rhythm when the Lord finally,
it is.
Like,
and I think when moving here, I was such like head down, headstrong. We're doing adoption that I was so, I say this often, I was so uninterested in grieving. I was so uninterested in resting and I don't want to say it felt boring to me, but it felt so inconvenient. And I think when you go through so many traumatic things, there is this part of you that just wants to get back to normality. And knowing that you actually have to go through that season of grief and rest to get back to normality feels really heavy and really hard. And so we tried to avoid it many times in so many areas of our lives. Like we're like, oh, that it's fine. We just, my father just passed, just bulldoze through it. We just lost our entire country and ministry and work and everything. Let's just bulldoze through it. What's the next thing, And the Lord just kind of continued to pull us back and not allow things to move forward until we really took that time of rest. And that season led to, in that season of kind of resisting it. And I say this double-edged sword, like it led to 3 failed adoptions, but I don't think that those 3 failed adoptions were our fault. I just think that the Lord didn't release something until it was time.
It's so good. Here's the craziest thing for listeners is that this is only chapter 1 of her story. So let's continue into the
Let's keep
additional
going.
trauma 2 and 3.0. When she gets to America, go ahead and continue the story, because
Yeah.
that's the crazy thing, is we're just getting started, you guys. This is such a gnarly story.
Okay. I was like, I honestly had this like, like Israelites coming out of the, slavery. I'm like, let's
Oh
go to
yeah,
the promised land. We're going to get there. It's going to be good. Man, did we go through the desert.
dude.
Day one of being in America, I was like, let's start this process. And so, and my darling husband oftentimes has to be the brakes in our marriage, but this time I was like, sure, just go for it, Liz. I think he was so out of his mind, confused about what just happened. And, I just started working on the next adoption, which was another China adoption. And, as with hundreds of families around the world, we waited for China to open up again, and it didn't. And so we experienced another failed adoption there. We moved on to domestic adoption. We were, our first match, we were matched with a birth mother who was giving birth to a little girl. And that little girl ended up being, we were told it was a stillborn. So we were domestic, and then we had time, and then we got matched again. And we were like, are we going to say yes to this? It was so hard for us to say yes. But we did, because we had such a great connection with the birth mother, and we had a relationship. And then it turns out, after walking with her for 6 months, that this woman was actually never pregnant. Yeah. For those of you listening who have followed our story and never heard why that adoption never happened. So that's why it was a complete scam. And so we
let
had gone.
me ask you a question there really quick. I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah. No.
What is the first thought that goes through your head when you're on, I mean, this is what is that, attempt 6 or attempt 5 or 6 for adoption?
6,000?
And
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you get that news that you have not only been bonding with a woman that was not even pregnant, and you had just been totally played, but you had given all your money. You had, I mean, it totally stole you dry in every single way.
Yes.
You were done at that point.
Yeah.
You had, like, your heart was barely
mad.
beating.
Yeah.
What do you say to the Lord when that thing happens?
So the interesting part about that was that, people hearing that story, their first go-to is just to be so angry at the birth mother, and like, you've got to be so angry at her. Uli's and both of our anger actually was more towards the Lord. We felt so deceived, because we had just spent so much time really praying and really like laying that down, and really saying, Lord, we can't go through this again, and really just feeling the peace to say yes to it. And then it didn't happen. And I think in that time, I had this like perspective of, you better show up. Like, you better do something. You better do something with this. And I'm just going to stay over here broken on the floor as a puddle, and you can just go do something. And he was very much like, get up.
Yeah.
Get up and keep going. And I was so mad at him, because I was like, what do you expect of me at this point? Like, how much more breaking can I do for these children? And that was really, I think at that season was all of it lifted. All of the like head down, like just get through it. Everything that we had endured, it just all rushed in. And I really believe, looking at it now, that was the point. It was that I needed to get to that place of 100% just surrender of I'm not going to get to do this the way I want to do this. And this is not going to happen in my timing. And this is not going to happen the way I want to. And you are actually really breaking me for something. And I don't understand that quite yet. But
can I ask you something there?
Yeah.
What would you say is the difference between, because it's like you felt surrendered, And then all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
you break more and you're like, I guess I wasn't. And so
Yeah.
we always are arriving at this new place where we think we're surrendered and we're like, wow.
Yes.
What would you say is the difference between surrendering and giving up?
So I think I look at like how you hold your hands. If you're in a place of you're giving up, you're kind of dropping that thing. And if you're
Mm.
in a place of surrendering it, you're opening your hand. And I
Mm.
think that a lot of times I always have this for those watching, are you watching my hand? Um,
No, that's a
Evie is,
good
for those who are
imagery.
listening, Evie is literally doing what I'm doing with my hands.
That's a great visual for me because this is dropping, but lifting
Yeah.
them 180 degrees, that is a totally
Yeah.
different posture.
And often the times we get stuck in areas. If you think about like, I can't move forward in something, I feel stuck. Well, it's usually because you're holding on to something that's not going with you through that space. And you got to let go of whatever it is that you're holding on to in order for that hand to go through. And so I think in that time I wanted to, I mean, well, okay. I think there was a big, like, so angry at God and so mad. And I remember my very good friend is a pastor who came over and he kind of listened to me rant off about God for a long time, which was very gracious of him. And he said to me, he's like, Liz, we all know you're not going to give up until your children are home, right? And I just looked at him and I was like, yes. And he's like, so we all know you're going to keep going. So the point of this is not will she keep going, but how is she going to keep going? And so I had to completely surrender. And there was a very pivotal decision that we had to make at that time because we had our agency in that time of domestic had opened us up for the possibility of doing an India adoption, which slight backstory, Uli and I have worked with children's home in India for like over 1.5 decades. It's a huge place where our heart belongs to. And so it had been a program that was very hard for international adoptions for many decades. And then, recently it had opened up. And so they had told us that we could switch over our dossier from China there. And it was, honest to God, it was kind of in the back of our brains. We were really focused on the domestic. We're like, we'll eventually get to India. We'll just see what happens. And then right after that domestic adoption, we found out that it wasn't happening. It was a scam. They said, hey, you actually are now at the place where you can say yes to the India program. Like, they can approve you. Do you want to do this? And
I will
that was
never
my,
forget when you called me with that
yes,
and you literally on the phone, you were like, I'm letting Uli choose.
yes,
You were like, he is in the driver's seat. I have driven this thing and I am
yes,
tired. And it was this, like, for me, that's when I kind of, as from the friend angle, saw the actual surrender. Cause I'm like, that's not
yeah,
like you. But I remember you were like, this is something God's asking me to literally let him choose. And it
yes,
was such a
yeah,
beautiful picture from a friend's standpoint that
yeah.
you were letting it go.
I had to choose. The choice was, do we want to try for another domestic or do you want to go into the India program, knowing that the India program could be 2 more years until you're even matched and bringing your child home. And at this point, it's been 3 years of being in America, 3 failed adoptions. And so to make that choice it just felt like so not fair. And I
Yeah.
couldn't. And I also felt I was no longer in a place mentally, emotionally, and spiritually where I was the right one to make that decision. And I think that is surrender. I had to say, okay, Uli, I'm giving this to you. And he was able to really take time and pray. And he came and he said, it's India. We need to say yes to India. And
Mm.
we said yes on Friday. On Monday morning, we got into the India program, and on Friday, we got an email of a little girl wearing none other than a bunny coat, and that was our little Amaline. And that was her. And so 6 months later brings us to this past September. We were in India meeting our second little bunny, and now she's home. And it's yeah, it's she's home, and it's like
Have you
finally we can
breathed? Have
breathe.
you had
Yeah,
a second where you've exhaled and you've been able to be like, wow, that
yeah,
was a fight?
yes. It's so bonkers how your brain is like, that was such a fight and you fought so hard for this, and then it's also just looking at her like, yeah, of course she's here, like,
Yeah.
it's only been this many years and this many battles and all, and that is the beauty of when something is so meant to be. It's like you're entering into that chapter of your life of like, she was and always was the second bunny, you know?
I mean, there are so many questions I have, so many
Mm,
stinking questions, but what I keep hearing in the thread of
mm,
so much of this is the loneliness that
mm.
really tried to suffocate you out. Like
Yes.
the enemy, you had a fat target on your back to just be lonely because your story was so unique. You could not relate to anyone. No one
No,
understood
no.
the depths of trauma and pain and ache. I mean, from all sides, financially, spiritually. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
from that standpoint, I know you had tunnel vision, and I think that was just a special grace the Lord put on you. The Lord, the Lord put it on you.
Some in our marriage, some in our marriage, meaning Evie's part of our marriage too, might see it differently. Tunnel vision is not so great
Sure.
sport time.
Well,
No,
I'm
I think it's both. I really do. I think that the same thing that can be a blessing in your life can absolutely be like your cross to bear. And mine is definitely being like headstrong, tunnel vision. We're going for this. And I don't, and that gets me to goals, but that also it can lead to a
make it
lot of
hard.
pain along the way. Yeah.
Yes, totally. Yeah,
So
you're
I
definitely susceptible to a lot of wounds. I carry
yes,
the same genetic makeup of just endurance, but
yeah.
it's sometimes more like sandpaper. Like it's just like, oh gosh, like
Mm,
are you making this harder than it needs to be?
yes, yes,
You and I are both big feelers, and so
yeah,
um, we because we're artists, the feelings will help stir creativity, which is crucial for us to be able to export and
yes,
like relieve ourselves. But in that same vein, the feelings also stir up so much, like not yet. We're like, Lord, why am I living in the not yet all the time? Why is a
yes.
decade of my life not yet? And we
Mm,
also carry that endurance of like, it's a curse and a gift because a lot of people would have given up in our stories, but we're like,
yeah.
no.
No, well, I'm just thinking like I didn't think about this until now, but I think this is the beauty of an artist, that artists can see things before they are reality, and they will fight for them to be in existence. Like I always think about Michelangelo, before he made David, he would just stare at that block of stone for so long. And I remember there was this story about like his apprentice came in and said like, what are you doing? What? And he's like, oh, I'm staring at the person inside of it, and until I can figure out how to get them out, I will not touch it. And I think like the Lord gave me those visions of my three little rabbits. And more so over, God has given me very clear visions of what my children even would look like. Um, and I think having that has been I'm like, well, they're not here yet. So I got to get them out of the marble. But it's
Yeah.
also been my biggest burden of my life because I wasn't able to just go, I guess this isn't happening, you know?
Yeah. This morning, literally, Zach and I were talking about a very similar thing about the difference between imagination and fantasizing.
Yes.
And because you and I are such dreamers, we can accidentally trip into this life of fantasy. And when
Yes.
our real life, our 3D real life, does not reflect the fantasy that we've slapped the sticker of holy
Mhm.
dreams, visions from the Lord, and we're like, wait a minute, and the Lord's like, hey, I want to sanctify your imagination. I want you to dream with me, walk with
Mm.
me,
Yes.
because it's that getting like stuck in the fantasy that will trip believers up, because then you're
Yes.
just stuck. And we have both been stuck there where we're like, whoa, what was that? Because
Yes.
that's
And I
not
think
what you
that's the
showed
key
me.
point is like, it's not taking the vision and then just running with it, but always coming back and being like, okay, Lord, has anything changed, or where are we going from this? And I feel like I look even at our failed adoptions, I look at them, and actually we would never have gotten to Ameline had we not gone through those 3 adoptions. And not even just
Right.
like timeline wise, like, oh, the timing of her coming home had to been then, but also very like that adoption actually led to that adoption, and that led to
Right.
that. And I think I look at that now and I'm like, nothing was wasted. Nothing was wasted. And but it would have been very easy, and there was so many times through our entire journey of wanting to become parents that we would have done anything to be parents, and that was the moment where we had to say, hold on.
This is an idol.
Yes. Whether it came to battling infertility, and we would have done anything, you know, or going into adoption, we would have done anything. There's always these moments where you're like, well, this is good. Desiring to be a parent, wanting your children,
Yeah.
these are holy desires. They are. But what will you do to bring your children home can always be influenced with the temptation of sin. And so I think it has to be that yeah, the dance between the surrender and the fight. And I feel like that is something over the years, if there's anything I've learned, is when to surrender and when to fight. And oftentimes it's internal, and it's with yourself.
And I think oftentimes it's in your secret place in the prayer closet of just like
Yes.
the fighting is there. The fighting
Yeah.
is being honest, letting that honesty bleed into intimacy, telling him your fears. Like fighting in that space is never wasted.
Yeah.
It's in that space where strategy is given. But I think the last thing I kind of want, or not last thing, but one of the things I want to touch on is the way that grief, and like we talked about, how pivotal, like you ran from it. I watched you run from it. I watched you slide it under the rug, pretend that like extreme things didn't happen. I'm like, wait, should we like talk about this? You're like, no, we're going, get in or get out.
Doing it. You're either with me or against me mindset.
Oh my gosh, it was awesome. So what would you say from your experience of, you know, you were cautiously invited a handful of people to grieve with you.
Yes. Yeah.
What would you say was helpful in your grieving season from the people that you allowed in?
Oh, it's so incredibly important who you let in and who you share your story with. Even to the point of this podcast. Like, I mean, Evie was asking me to do this for a long time, and I was like, it's not time. I'm not ready. Yeah. Just even talking about it in a way that I can talk about it now is from a season of going through the grief and going through it. I think it's pivotally important to have people who have context and understanding of what you're going through, and then to have the right type of people. You got to have your person who will sit in the closet with you and just cry and say nothing.
Yeah.
And then you've got to have your person who, you know, kicks your ass and says, get out of the closet. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I just said ass on your podcast.
I love it.
I'll be that person. And then you've really got to have your person who has like, who can really just help you strategically plan to keep going. How do we go forward? But I think that with these journeys for adoptive parents and mothers is that, yes, I think mothers are mothers. And I think that we all can connect on so many things, however you ended up becoming a mother. There's always a way for us to understand each other's stories and support each other. But there is something very unique about adoption. And I think it's vitally important that you find people who have been on a similar shared journey. You know, something I think about when you say that is like, I remember when I was waiting for Ameline, I had so many of my friends who were pregnant at the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, this wait is, it's just going to kill me. And they were like, well, it's just like being pregnant. I also have to wait to see my child, in 8 months. And it wasn't you, Amy, don't worry.
No, I know it wasn't me. I'm just saying, like, I can't tell you how many times people said that to me. And I just need people to hear, It's not helpful. I know it's
Well,
tender and
yes, and being able to say to people, and this is the other thing, is that when you're an adoptive parent, if you're doing any kind of something that is unique and not necessarily the norm, you also have to be in a position of understanding that your part of your role and your job is to educate people tenderly and lovingly and explaining to them how to be better people and how to be better supporters to you, right? So
yeah.
something I would say to someone is like, actually, it's very different. I understand that you're very excited and longing to have your child in your arms, as am I. But, in that case, for instance, I would say, well, your child is in your womb. Your child is with you. You have control over what goes on in your body and the environment that you put them in.
You can
And when
talk
you're
to
waiting on a
it.
child, yeah,
Yeah.
when you're waiting on a child who's halfway across the world, you don't have that control and you don't
You don't know the
have that.
conditions. Yeah.
Yes. And so I think I've also just kind of learned, I've taken some time to really have some quick responses, kind of like my go-to responses to how to respond to people. But I've also learned and taken some people by the hand and showed them how to be supportive to me and how
Yeah.
to do that, which is not easy and very uncomfortable, but it's
It
crucial.
is. Well, and I even am thinking in Matthew 27, when Jesus invites his three closest friends into the garden, he asks them, will you please keep watch? And they fall
Yes.
asleep. And so,
Yes.
like, even in that moment of like, I'm bringing you into my harshest, deepest moment of grief,
Yes.
and your people unintentionally let you
Yes.
down,
Yes.
it still can squeeze out these prayers within us that are like, gosh, though my spirit is willing, my flesh is weak. And I just even think, like, would Jesus have prayed that had his friends not fallen asleep and kind of let
Mm,
him down in that moment? Like, it
yeah.
forces and purges these things in our spirit that's like, Lord. And there's so many streams that passage could go down. But I think of that as you share, of just like,
Yeah.
in our deepest moments, sometimes they will let us down.
Yeah.
And it's a gift in that way, because then it purges and forces these new level of surrender just when you think you haven't given enough, right? And then the next prayer is
Yeah.
like, your not my will, yours, Lord. And it's
Mm,
like the ultimate posture, like you said, of just like, I'll do it. I'll do it,
yeah.
you know?
And I think with that concept of like, would you kind of surround me while I go into this? It's really having the right people who understand. If you're in a battle, you are not in your right mind, like
Mm,
I I told people when I first met them, when I moved to America, like some of my closest friends now, I'm like, you met me at the strangest time of my life, thank you for
truly.
still sticking around. But
Yeah.
I think it's super important that when you're coming around somebody in the middle of a battle like that you understand that they are going through unimaginable pressure and emotions and grief and hardship. They're not at their best. And so kind of like meeting people in the expectation that they would respond maybe on a normal day is just, you need to let that go. You need to understand that they are so fragile, they're so tender, and that everything that you say has weight to it.
Mm,
And but also for the people who are in it to understand, who will understand this fully other than the Lord? No one.
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we can't put all of our expectations on people to always meet us there and always be with us there, because there's limits to their ability to support us. And so it unfortunately it will be, and it is intended to be a lonely journey, because it always is intended to be walked with you and your husband and the Lord.
Yeah.
um
And I mean, from the genesis of adoption, it's lonely because it shouldn't be, right? So
right.
you're, oh, geez. You are, sorry, throwing my computer around. You're already starting from this posture of like, this shouldn't be a reality.
Mm,
Adoption,
yeah.
needy children, like this is a really,
Mhm.
really sad reality. And
Yes.
so you're already starting from a pretty weary place, which
Yes. Well,
leads
adoption
me.
is, yeah, it's warfare. I mean, you're walking
Yeah.
into something that is, adoption in itself, just to go off the cup for a little bit here, like, is the enemy's biggest nightmare, because the enemy's favorite people to go to are vulnerable, innocent children who have no parents to protect them, who have nobody fighting for them, and they are the most susceptible to his will. And so adoption completely disrupts that, right? And so you're already walking into a very broken situation. And this is something that I often tell parents when they're kind of walking into the beginning stages of it, is it's going to break you, and it should break you. And the reason for that is, at the other end of your journey is the string to your child, who is also breaking. And there is no adoption story that doesn't start with trauma, that doesn't start with brokenness, from losing, biological parents, or possibly birth culture and heritage. They are entering into this adoption broken. And it makes sense to me. It doesn't feel good. I don't like it, and I hate it, but it makes sense to me that the Lord allows us as parents to also enter into it broken. And I think, like, through that brokenness is when we can actually meet our children in their brokenness. We can understand. We're not just going with sympathy, but empathy into their brokenness. And we can together heal and create a new family. But it's like this constant perspective that we have of like that's like the number one thing that I get asked of, like, basically questions that are, what's the path of least resistance? Where the real thing should be, the question should be, what do I need to do in order to allow myself to break, to get ready for this battle? And that's so hard. We don't want that. We don't want to break. We don't want to go through that.
I am stuck on how you just talked about empathy, because I think that's why it's so important to process grief from day one of stepping into something like adoption, because unprocessed grief will always metastasize into self-pity. And if you are walking through adoption with the filter of pity, which is just shame and pride with lipstick on, if that is your starting base for your adoption process, and not empathy and this like true heart posture and humility of Jesus, you're going to get all tangled up in the parenthood and journeys and even the war and the journey itself. You're going to be like, oh, woe is me and this. But when you can process your grief from start through the process, have your safe people, have your pillars, prioritize a secret place. When you have those things and you can process your aching heart, then it positions you. You're already a warrior for your child. You're digging wells with the Lord. You're giving an inheritance before you have a child, even in your home. You're like, this is the legacy I'm building. Yes. I am stone by stone going to tell that child that this was the journey of our family. And it's like, it's just, I think building a legacy is so not talked in. It's just, there's so many thoughts going through my head. But
well, I think it's also that, I think who I was entering into being a first-time mother with Bobe, and who I am, or who I've been to become a mother second time with Ameline, I can absolutely see the different breaking points that the Lord did that was pivotal for the mother that I needed to be for Bobe, and who I needed to be for Ameline. And so I always tell mothers, like, it is the most holy time. And it's holy for a few reasons. And the first and foremost, you will never pray for your child how you pray for them when you're waiting to get them home. You will never intercede for them in that same way. It's
so good.
Yeah. And you don't understand how important it is to be interceding for them in that season where you can't get to them. I always say, like, the wait for my first child was like, I'm so excited to be a mom. I'm so excited to get to my child. Yes. I'm so excited to have her. The wait for me has been so different when we were from the point of being matched with Ameline and getting her home, was I can't wait to get her out. Because when you understand that trauma, you understand the depths of that brokenness, you understand that even in the best case scenarios, the best orphanage, children's home, foster care, a child institutionalized for even one day is susceptible for a lifetime of trauma. And I don't say that to scare people, and I don't say that to make people fearful, but I say that's the reality of what you're praying for. So you are standing in that gap. And honestly, oftentimes you are the first person who has ever interceded for that child.
Yeah.
And so you are praying for them in a totally different manner and capacity. And then that in that prayer, not only are you praying for them, but man, does the Lord tell you what kind of mother you got to be for them, you
Oh
know?
my gosh, dude. It's wild. The urgency and the spirit of when you don't have your
Yes.
child yet, it
Yeah.
is next level. You're totally right.
And
Um,
that's the, I think that's the other thing is that we talked a lot about surrender. And that's, I mean, throughout the years, something I've had to do over and over again. But the
yeah.
one point that I will say is that it's so pivotal to know when to surrender and when to fight. You know, one of the biggest things that I learned with both girls was everyone wants to get to their kid as fast as possible, but and I feel for every social worker who has to constantly tell parents, like, have patience, calm down, you'll get there.
I feel
But
you and I are the worst. Like I was
oh,
like,
yes,
I am texting
I'm
you
very
every
sorry for
day.
all of our social workers who have dealt with me.
Yes. Oh, we
But
need to send them coffee.
I will say this. There is, on both of my girls, there was this peace over the time period of just this hurts and I want to get to them. But then in both cases, that peace lifted. And I had an unbelievable urgency to get to both of them. And
Mm,
I couldn't explain it other than I was like, I have to go. And you know, with
yeah.
Bobe, I remember, and you remember this, that they were like, well, you'll probably end up getting her in spring of 2020. And it was November. And I looked at Ul in the eyes and I said, we need to get her home by Christmas. And he
Yeah.
said, is that a desire or is that a conviction? And I said, it's a conviction. And he said, then go. And I knew what that meant, like be a bulldozer. And
Fight.
I
Yeah.
bulldozed and God flung those doors open and we got her home by Christmas. And Bobe was second to last child out of China before the doors shut. And if we would have waited and been patient, she could still be there today. And with Ameline, it was the exact same thing. I had all this peace, and then it was like paperwork wasn't pushing in India. No one was getting things done. Sorry, it's my perspective. And I was like, I think we just need to go to India. I know it's not time, but we need to go.
Yeah.
And
I
so
was
all
the
we said
same
was
way.
pray.
Yeah.
And the Lord said something to me that changed me and that really it shifted my entire perspective on the last 10 years. He said, Elizabeth, I am and I have never been the one in the way of you getting to your children. I am
Dude.
not the one who is stopping them from being with you. I don't know how to explain how deep I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
And it changed everything for me. And 3 days later, we got on a
Mm,
plane. We went to India and we got Emmeline, and she was so sick. She couldn't even sit up. She was so malnourished and so sick. And she's been dealing with a lot of things. And we got her, immediately cared. And I knew that we needed to get her then.
wow.
And that's the difference, right? So
Yeah.
like know when to surrender and know when to fight.
It's so good. I just want you to end with saying, what would you say
Mm,
in one sentence to the
oh
mother who
gosh.
is currently waiting
Mm.
to adopt her baby?
Your weight is so holy. And if there's any way that you can shift your brain into realizing that this is good, let it be. Let it be long. Let it be hard. Let it break you because the Lord is good and he's doing something with it that is holy, that is exactly part of the plan. And grieve when you need to grieve, fight when you need to fight, and surrender when you need to surrender. That was not a
Dude.
sentence. I'm so sorry.
Paragraph. I told you, I knew that you would be blessed by Liz's story and her heart and just her posture and her journey and her testimony and all of the things. And yep, in the show notes, as always, you can find Liz's handle there. You can follow her and her husband's artistry and all the different things they are doing. I'm telling you, they're always doing something. And so they are definitely a really, really radical, amazing, obedient family to get to lean in and grow from. So if you have a second, if you could rate this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to, it means the world. And until next time on the Let Me Ask You This podcast, I will see you next week.